Up to the West Coast to cast his vote in Florida. We just heard from him a little while back. It was his best campaign of the three elections. He said 2016 was good. He won that election. 2020, he said, was better, but for whatever reason, he ended up on the losing side. But this, of course, is the best election that he's fought. But to make that stick, he also went on to make the point that he has to win the election to make it stick, that this, of course, is the best campaign that he's run. He listed out his key priorities, where the Republican candidate said that immigration, of course, remains the #1 issue for him and indeed for the American people, according to him. Now, earlier, Trump ended his final campaign rally after speaking for nearly about 2 hours in Michigan. He repeated many of his campaign promises. Listen.
And this was a very Trump area. We know what that means. It's Trump. Trumpy. They call it a Trumpy area. And with a lot of love and great people, no crime, no nothing. Just great people, but it was devastated, essentially destroyed.
And we will make America great again. Thank you, North Carolina. Go out and vote.
The Vice President Kamala Harris will spend the election day in Washington, D.C. She'll take part in radio interviews. This is what her office has said.
We will win. And we will win. We will win. And we will win because when you know what you stand for, you know what to fight for.
So with the race so close, states like Iowa might pull a surprise, while swing states are still the crucial ones. Other states can potentially change the course of the race.
Now, as the race to the White House continues to heat up, Hollywood stars have made their leanings clear. From performances to speeches, Hollywood celebrities have not shied away from lending their star power to Democrat nominee Kamala Harris. And Harris's rally in Pennsylvania, in fact, was proof of the same. Lady Gaga performed God Bless America. Other celebrities in attendance were Oprah Winfrey, Katy Perry. The U.S. Vice President is also being backed by Jennifer Lopez, Beyonce, Rihanna, George Clooney, Cardi B, Eminem, Bruce Springsteen, Hollywood's beloved Avengers, and Taylor Swift. In fact, the pop star put her weight behind Harris when she shared a post in her favor soon after the presidential debate. However, Harris is not the only one who is being endorsed by big Hollywood stars, of course. Let's take a look at the celebrities who are endorsing Donald Trump. A slew of them have spoken out in favor of the Republican nominee. The biggest names rallying for Trump, including Hulk Hogan, Jason Aldean, Kid Rock, Kodak Black, John Voight, Russell Brand. While there is, of course, time for the final results, it will be interesting, rather, to watch out to what extent the celebrity star power and the endorsement by the celebrities actually tilts the balance, if at all. And with us on the broadcast this minute is Adam Schwartz, writer and political commentator with us from London. Adam, thanks very much for being here on the broadcast. I have to ask you for your assessment at this point of the way in which we've seen the two candidates wooing different sections of the voters, and the way the pollsters have been talking about this as a neck-and-neck battle. What to you stood out as far as their last-minute pitches are concerned?
Well, I think, every single US presidential election, both candidates say that this is the most important election in their lifetimes. But I think in the minds of so many people, they really believe that actually this time that really is true. And I think really the main reason for that is the huge gulf in sort of character and temperament and opinion of both main candidates on a whole host of different issues, like women's healthcare, like healthcare in general, but even on some issues that aren't even normally in play, like respect for democracy or US maintaining NATO support. So in terms of your question, in terms of the way that the candidates have actually tried to draw up support from their voters last minute, I think they've really leaned into those two kind of main areas, really, to try to really sort of to create some enthusiasm from their base, because really all kind of previous US presidential elections have really shown that that is the way to win. If you don't have enthusiasm amongst your base, you don't have high turnout, it's very, very difficult to actually drive support. And I think it's particularly important when you have, according to polls, what is such a close election, what seems like almost like a 50-50 split, that actually that turnout, even of a small sort of 1-2%, could actually make all the difference. So I think really in terms of what we're seeing on this final day when voting's taking place is really a push for turnout from both candidates. And I think obviously it makes a lot of sense, really.
Indeed, Adam, just a short while back, we were outlining for our viewers key developments coming in from Israel, where Netanyahu has fired the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant. This is, of course, coming at a time when Americans are voting. How can we not then, at this point, talk about to what extent the U.S. election outcome will actually impact the situation in West Asia?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an absolutely fascinating question. I think it's one that's sort of partly misunderstood. I mean, both I think Harris and Trump have tried to sort of claim parts of the US electorate that actually care deeply about this issue in the Middle East. We know that both Trump and Harris have appealed to both Jews and Muslims, which when polled actually show that they care most about this issue going on to do with Israel and conflict with the countries and really with the regions around it. I think in terms of Harris, I think, probably you'd probably say that, largely she will continue with the kind of policies that Biden has kind of enacted, which is trying to support Israel, but also trying to kind of restrain it in terms of trying to reduce civilian impacts. I think in terms of Trump, it's actually a lot more complicated and nuanced, and largely based on his character. Of course, he tried to present himself as a huge fan of Netanyahu, and really vice versa as well from Netanyahu. But actually, if we look at when Trump was in office, actually him and Netanyahu had a very difficult relationship and often didn't get on some very important issues. So I think, there is a general consensus by the US electorate, so again, polling backs this up, that actually Trump is the kind of pro-Israel candidate. But in fact, I think in reality, it's perfectly possible that actually Trump could even be, in certain situations, actually more critical and put more pressure on the Israeli government. But of course, you mentioned that, Netanyahu has fired his defense minister, which is something he's wanted to do for a long time. Of course, Netanyahu has probably likely timed that for the US election, actually. So I think ultimately, it may have a big impact. We know that Trump has said that he wants the war in the Middle East to have stopped by the time he comes into office. I think reality is very difficult for him to do so. But I think in terms of whether we can look at one candidate as kind of pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, and the other, I think it's very, very difficult to do so.
Speaking of domestic issues, Adam, to what extent with the economic issues actually determine the election outcome? We've had a series of polls, talking about the importance of inflation, talking about how these are issues that actually are on the top of the mind of the voters, of course.
Yeah, well, of course, the economy really is, going back decades, is an issue that really tends to be at the top of the voters' list. And of course, American voters feel that way as well. Of course, all over the world, we've seen economies impacted and trying to recover from the COVID pandemic. And of course, to a lesser extent, the Ukraine war. I think the reality is that actually America, when you compare it to other similar sort of industrialized economies, is actually doing pretty well. Even though it had this period of high inflation and sort of low growth, it's actually sort of brought that back to about 3% inflation, but also about 2.9% economic growth, but actually comparatively is very good. But of course, we know that, prices don't come down simply because inflation is lower. And therefore, you have a period in office where the Democrats have been controlling the federal government, been controlling the presidency, where voters have seen their bills rise. And of course, as inflation, as you mentioned, is really the top main economic issue that voters tend to focus on. So I think really, that is going to be a fundamental issue. Of course, it's accompanied by a whole range of other social issues like women's rights and healthcare that have accompanied that. But I think really, when we see the result, it will really reflect the extent to which the American public is willing to say, you know what, we understand things have been difficult, but actually want to continue down this track with the Democrats, or whether they want to take a bit of a chance with Trump, who's of course promised the greatest economy in history.
Right, Adam, just a short while back, we were outlining for our viewers what these celebrity endorsements have looked like for the two candidates. As always, we've seen a string of those celebrities, supporting either candidate. Just a short while back, we had Trump, in fact, slamming Oprah Winfrey, Harris supporter, saying that she is a divider and claiming that she wanted to run with him as vice president nominee. Just a quick reaction to that statement.
Well, I think, the kind of jury's out as to whether celebrity endorsements really do impact the vote. But I think there's certainly one thing that is not going to help is actually attacking celebrities like Trump has done with Oprah Winfrey. We know that she is phenomenally popular among both Republicans and Democrats. And so I think the decision to actually go after her in a very personal way, which is a very typical way that Trump deals with people who don't align with him politically, may actually be a big mistake on his part. But we know that the sort of push to try to get celebrities kind of comes with a general shift in elections in America, which is where generally voters are watching less mainstream news and actually following influencers more or listening to particular podcasts more. I think that has been such an important way that actually you've seen this polarization take place in American politics, where actually people have moved away from those mainstream sources. So I think really all this kind of shift to get celebrities on board is really all part of the kind of polarization taking place in America. But as again, there's so much speculation that's taking place right now, but really we have to wait for results to come in, hopefully in the next few hours, and we'll get a much clearer picture.
Adam, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us with those perspectives. In fact, let's cut straight across to Tim Walz. A quick reaction.
Saying, any indicator, he probably will, but I want to remind folks, we have the freest, most secure elections. It's going to take some time to get results. We're going to go up, down, but at the end of the day, as we always do, we will get the results that we know are accurate, and at that point in time, the winner will be announced, and the loser will be announced, and work for the winner. We got time for a couple more.
You guys President Harris today?
Give us a sense of what the campaign internal polling is showing here at the very end.
No, I don't know any of that. And what I tell them, and candidly on this, the internal polling did not matter to me. I had a job to do to go out and make the message. That's what I was concerned.
Did you speak to Vice President Harris today or last night? How did you feel like working the conversation?
No, I haven't spoken to her yet, but I was like all of you watching that. The week before I got the chance to run in Philly, and I ran up those stairs like Rocky or whatever, when I saw she'd set up there, it was golden. So,
now, you said you'll go to your grave not knowing why this thing is so close. You've been all across the country. Have you got any indicator of why this
look, it's a divided country. That's what we are. It's a divided country. But I think that the fatigue of Donald Trump, you can feel it out there. Folks are excited about voting, and I just can't describe the difference in the vibe that's out there with folks and how hungry they are for something different. Yeah, they said the numbers are good. We're hearing from our folks there. Everything's working well. Secretary of State says things are working, so we're feeling good.
Senator, when you got up this morning, what were you thinking, and what are you thinking right now? I mean, this is really the day you've been working for.
Yeah, 90 days. I said it seems, kind of closing that loop. My faith in this country has been so restored. I said when I sat in a room like that, I never thought I'd be in Harrisburg in a diner with folks, and how familiar they feel to me, like people I grew up with, people in Mankato, people in St. Paul. And I think that's the beauty of this thing. I think it's lost in all of the noise and all of that is, this is truly a remarkable thing we do every 4 years. I would argue we could probably do it better, but those are questions for other things, how elections, but it's democracy. It's messy, it's beautiful, it's the people, and for me, just my confidence in how things go. So,
what are you watching for as you watch the results tonight? Are there specific counties or demographics, voters?
Look, the team does that, and I think the team that knows me that's something I've never done. I feel like as a candidate, my job is to talk to everybody. I understand how it works, whatever. There's data people that will know this, and Steve Kornacki gets paid to do it, so I'll want, and the rest of you. I'm simply going to go now. We're going to go do some more radio calls. I'm going to take a big, long run and then get back together, and then our team will start putting those numbers together. But look, I would end with this and tell people, this will be won by 1 or 2 votes per precinct in places like Pennsylvania. This is a time when there's a privilege to live in this country and a responsibility. Get out and vote. Exercise that freedom. Exercise that vote. And choose what you know is right, I would ask people. That the opportunity of hopefulness, unity, forward-looking versus this absolute chaos of Donald Trump. We're going to turn the page here. So thank you all. Grateful.
Now,
Now, we were earlier joined by John Bolton, former assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, who shed light on what the future of the United States would look like under the two contenders, that's Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Listen into his excerpts.
Well, I think there'd be significant differences. To start with Harris, though, I think the best you can predict is that her administration, at least for a year or so, would be very much like the Biden administration. And the new advisors she'll bring in will be part of the Democratic establishment. So, different events in the world or domestically will cause presidents to go in different directions. But one of the things many people here say is that if Harris were elected, she would be Barack Obama's fourth term, as in many ways Joe Biden, Barack Obama's vice president, was Obama's third term. Trump is a lot harder to predict because he doesn't have a philosophy. Certainly in the national security space, he doesn't think in policy terms. His decisions are episodic, transactional, ad hoc, all seen through the prism of whether they benefit Donald Trump. There are some things he focuses on. He focuses on illegal immigration across the Mexican border. He's focused on the economy and the still very painful inflation that occurred during the Biden administration. But these are issues that he's used throughout his career, and it doesn't tell you that much about the direction he'll go. Most Republicans hope and think that he will behave like a traditional Republican in terms of lower taxes, less regulation, appointing conservative judges. That may come true, but with Trump, you just never know. Well, I think the first thing to consider is that from today until January the 20th, when the new president is sworn in, we'll have what in America we call a lame duck president. And I think that is always a dangerous period because our adversaries see that as an opportunity to cause trouble. They know the lame duck president only has a few days or weeks left in office and is hesitant to take strong action that would affect his successor. Now, if Kamala Harris wins, then I think the lame duck period is less of a threat, but it's a signal that the policies will basically remain the same. And I think the one major difference there may be depending on the circumstances that exist when Harris takes office. She would be less favorable to Israel than Biden has been. I think most people believe that Trump will be even far more favorable to Israel than Biden has been, but and that may be the most likely outcome, but it's not certain because Trump has also said with respect to the war in the Middle East that he wants that over with by the time he takes the oath of office. And I think he just wants it off his table. He doesn't want to have to deal with it. I think it's very unlikely the conflict will be over by then, so he'll have to. But his instinct is just to put it behind him. He views it as a Biden problem. He said the Iranians and their terrorist allies never would have attacked if he had been president, which, of course, is an unprovable statement in either direction. But I think he just wants to get it out of the way and over with.
You were with us, and I hear we're doing very well. I hear we're doing very well. We did a great job in that we brought it back to the states, as you know. I believe in exceptions, as Ronald Reagan did. And we did a great job. We did something that they've wanted to do for 52 years. Yes, please.
Mr. President, you talked about if you win, there are tens of millions of Harris supporters who will be upset. What would your plan be to reach out to those people, bring them in? What would your message be?
Well, it'll be just that. We want to bring everybody in. We want to be very inclusive, and we will be very inclusive. We have a great country, but we have a country that's in trouble. It's in big trouble in many ways, and we have to straighten it out. We have crime is through the roof. We have people pouring through our borders that are not exactly perfect. They come out of prisons. 13,000 people convicted of murder. We don't need this in our country. We have enough difficulty. We don't need that. So I think people saw that, and it just seems that the conservatives are voting very powerfully. Just finish it up. No, I feel very confident. I have felt. You know, we went in with a very big lead today, and it looks like Republicans have shown up in force. So we'll see how it turns out. But it seems that they have really shown up in force. I just got a call from Dan Patrick in Texas. He said they've never seen anything like it. It's been very good. Look, regrets, you always have regrets. I can't think of any, to be honest, to use her expression. I can't think of any. Look, I ran a great campaign. I think it was maybe the best of the three. We did great in the first one. We did much better in the second one, but something happened. And this was the best. I would say this was the best campaign we ran.
President Trump, do you accept the possibility that you and Vice President Harris both might not get to 270 electoral votes by the end of tonight?
It should never happen. A thing like that should never happen. This election should be over. They spend all this money on machines. And frankly, if they'd use paper ballots, it would be over by 10 o'clock. And by the way, the paper ballots would cost 8%. Would be 8% of the cost. If they would use paper ballots, voter ID, proof of citizenship, and one-day voting, it would all be over by 10 o'clock in the evening. It's crazy. They use these very expensive computers, and I'm hearing in Pennsylvania they won't have an answer till 2 or 3 days from now. I think it's an absolute outrage if that's the case. Now, maybe it'll be later, but it's paper ballots in France. They went paper ballots because the mail-in was not working. It was corrupt. And in France, they went paper ballots. And at 10 o'clock in the evening, they had 37 million votes counted and done. They had a winner, they had a loser. And in this country, I mean, I'm just hearing that in certain states, it's going to be a long time, and it won't even be close. It won't even be that close. They say, I'm going to win the state, but it's going to take a long time to certify it.
Could you see a world where you don't declare victory tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing the same things that you're hearing. I'm hearing states where I'm up by a lot, but they won't have a final number for a long time.
What are your plans for tonight in terms of watching the results and so forth?
So we're going to have a very special group of people, many of whom you know, and they'll be at Mar-a-Lago. In addition, we'll have 4,000 or 5,000 people at the convention center. On the assumption I win, I mean, I don't know if something else happens. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of declaring victory, but if in normal times I would go over to the convention center, let's say at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or something, but I just don't know. It looks like we have a very substantial lead. It looks like we have many more Republicans voting today than Democrats. So if you have a lead and we have a bigger vote, that means you're doing very well, but they have to call a winner. They should, and they should call a winner, yes. Just stop talking about that. Go ahead. Oh, I don't know. I was honored to get Joe Rogan last night. I mean, Joe Rogan's a big deal. He's a very respected person. And I must tell you, Megyn was fantastic. She got up and said some things that were really pretty amazing. But before that, I just think we ran a good campaign. I had good policy. We want people to come into our country, but they have to come in legally. You know, we want strong borders, and we want people to come in. We want to be totally inclusive, but they have to come in. I think that was a big issue. To me, that was the biggest issue. I may be wrong. You know, a lot of people said inflation. Inflation's a disaster, but I think it's a second issue. I think the first is the border. We can't allow criminals to be put back into our country or to be put into our country. So you have 13,000 plus murderers allowed to roam in our country. Not going to be allowed. They have to go. You have drug dealers. You have terrorists. You have a tremendous amount of people that should not be in our country, and we need strong borders in this country. And I think people are voting in. I think it's personally, I think it's the number one issue. We'll see how it pans out, but I think it's the number one issue. I don't have to tell them that. I don't have to tell. I don't have to tell them that there'll be no violence. Of course there'll be no violence. My supporters are not violent people. I don't have to tell them that. And I certainly don't want any violence, but I certainly don't have to tell. These are great people. These are people that believe in no violence. Unlike your question, you believe in violence. Go ahead. Well, I think I'll be at Mar-a-Lago for the most part. We have a lot of political professionals. I'm going over now with Melania, who I'm very proud of. She's got the #1 bestseller. Can you believe that? He can believe it. But so we're very proud of the job she's done with that. Her book is #1. But we're going to go over to the office in West Palm, and we're going to say hello to the workers. They've worked very hard.
Will Georgia kind of be your first indication of whether it's going to be?
I think so. I mean, I hear we're doing very well there in Georgia. I hear we're doing very well. I hear we're doing very well everywhere. Now, I may regret that statement, but I'm hearing that we're doing very well everywhere. Would you go louder? No, I haven't prepared a speech. No, I did speeches last night, all day long, all night long. At 2 o'clock in the morning, we left, and we did a lot of speeches. You can probably tell. No, I don't have to do that. You know, I'm not a Democrat. I'm able to make a speech on pretty quick notice. If I win, I know what I'm going to say, and I don't even want to think about the losing part. I would like to tell all of the people that are online to stay online. We have tremendous Republican lines, and I've been asked actually to say it. It takes a while. I'd like to just make the statement that I'd like the Republicans to stay online. Democrats, if they'd like, they can leave. But I'd like the Republicans to stay online. I have no pressure whatsoever. I'm winning big cases. Those cases are all being won. The biggest case was the Florida case, and it's been won. I appreciate your nice question.
Sir, you and Mrs. Trump have been doing
No
this
pressure whatsoever.
for 9 years. Regardless of what happens tonight, is this your last campaign? Are you done after this?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I would think so.
How do you feel about it?
Sad, and very fulfilled. I think we're going to have a very big victory today.
Mrs. Trump, how are you feeling?
Very good, thank you. Thank you.
We're already a transition team, but I don't like talking about that until I find out how we do. I mean, well, it doesn't. Look, we're not looking to do damage to Iran, but they can't have a nuclear weapon. So, you know, my terms are very easy. They can't have a nuclear weapon. I'd like them to be a very successful country, but they just can't have a nuclear weapon. Well, I think Secret Service has been a little bit tougher, to put it mildly. I see more machine guns than I've ever seen in my life. We're surrounded by, I feel very confident with Secret Service. I think they've stepped up. Look, for a long time, they didn't give us the help. They didn't give us the assets, as they say, the manpower, woman power. They didn't give it to us. And we'd have rallies. You saw the rallies, 50, 60,000 people. And I'd have less people than Joe Biden, who had 5 people show up. And I'd have 55,000 people show up, and I had fewer people than him. So they should have done a much better job. And frankly, the president should make a very strong statement to the outside world. Because I think my team is incredible. Look, they say it's the best run campaign they've seen. Some people said it's the best run campaign they've ever seen. But in order to make that stick, you have to win.
How do you feel compared to your past campaigns? Are you more confident now than you were about your team than you were in the last 2 races?
My team, I'm very confident in. Many of them are the same players. As you know, Susie, a lot of the people are the same players. They've been very good.
Mr. President, Oprah said at Harris's rally last night, quote, "If we don't show up tomorrow, it is entirely possible we won't be able to count the ballot again."
Well, I think it's ridiculous. You know, Oprah, I was on her last show, or one of her last shows, and they picked the biggest people and all of that, and made a big deal. And I'm disappointed. I think Oprah's become a major divider in our country, and I think, frankly, she should be ashamed of herself. And you know who else should be ashamed? Fox, because I've seen Oprah on Fox about 50 times making the same statement, and I think it's a disgrace what Fox does, because everyone thinks Fox is so pro-Trump. They're not pro-Trump at all. They've put Oprah on all morning long. That's all I see is Oprah. And, you know, I knew Oprah very well. She's been in Mar-a-Lago many times. Roger King had his funeral. That's the head of King World, which was Oprah's mentor. And Oprah chose the location. She said, Mar-a-Lago is the most beautiful place. Would it be possible to have Roger's funeral at Mar-a-Lago in the ballroom? We did it. The only time I've ever had a funeral there. And I think Oprah should be ashamed of herself to say that. She should be ashamed. She knows me. She wanted to run with me as a vice president. She was going to be the vice president. She wrote me a letter. It's in the book. And now she goes and makes statements like that. She's a divider. And Barack Hussein Obama is a divider, too.
There are people who are concerned that you didn't concede the election in 2020 when you lost. They're concerned that if you lost this election, you wouldn't concede again. What do you say to those people?
I think they're crazy. If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it. And I think well, so far, I think it's been fair. I think there's been a lot of court cases. Both sides are lawyered up. Thousands of lawyers are involved. You know, thousands, can you imagine? And part of that is because we have too complicated a process. If we had a piece of paper, watermarked, you know that paper is more sophisticated now than computers. It's watermarked paper. You cannot, it's unbelievable what happens with it. There's nothing you can do to cheat. And it costs you practically nothing to run. Think of it. We spend hundreds of millions and billions of dollars on these campaigns. You could do it for 8% of the cost and have accuracy, and we wouldn't have to be worried about when is Pennsylvania going to announce. It's really a shame.
Last question.
Well, he knows exactly what, but that's only based on what RFK told. I don't think RFK wanted that. You're talking about Health and Human Services. Let me tell you, he's a great guy, RFK, and he's going to do pretty much what he wants as far as I'm concerned. He wants health for women, for men, for children, and I happen to agree with a lot of the things he says. The one thing I told him, and I've told you in speeches for the last 2 weeks, we got to keep them away from the liquid gold, because the liquid gold, we have more than any of it. It's called oil and gas. That one I'm going to handle. Well, I'd be honored to have him. Now, I haven't spoken to Howard about that, but look, if you think of it, he came in third, you know, in running for president, right? He ran a very good race. He had obstacles. The Democrats just really unfairly put obstacles up, and hence Kennedy left the Democrat Party for the Republicans. Now, he's a very smart guy. He's a very caring guy. He's very popular, too. We get up and introduce him. The place goes wild. No, we love having him. And you know who else we love having? Elon. He's been great. And everybody, look, everybody. Getting Joe Rogan last night and Megyn Kelly. We just have, this is very inclusive. This is a movement. This is the greatest political movement in the history of our country. And even you people, and some of you are fair sometimes, but it's the greatest movement in the history of our country, and I've made that statement 1,000 times. It has never been challenged. It is the greatest movement, and we're going to make America great again. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. This way. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Jack. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. How about you?
There who just cast his vote in Florida, and he said a number of different important things, where he said that if it is a fair election, then he would be the first one to concede if he were to lose. And he also pointed out, in his opinion, it's been a fair election so far. And apart from this, he spoke about a whole host of different issues, claiming that this could well be the last time that he'd run for presidency. It's the third time that he's running, and one way or another, this could potentially be his last time for the top job in the United States of America. And apart from this, questions were also raised. In the event he does not win this election, will his supporters go on a rampage like they did on the 6th of January at the Capitol Hill in the year 2021? He said his supporters are not violent people. There is no reason as to why he has to tell them anything, and he believes in peace, and that is how he would like things to, of course, pan out. Apart from this, he also insisted that this is the greatest political movement in the history of the United States of America. It's the most inclusive political movement in the history of the United States of America. That's how he's trying to get his message across to the voters of the United States of America, where he spoke about the number of different people who've now become a part of his campaign. Robert F. Kennedy, earlier a Democrat who's now a part of the Trump team, he could end up getting a position within the Trump cabinet if he were to win. He spoke about Elon Musk. He spoke about a whole host of different personalities who are now a part of his campaign. And it now remains to be seen as to how, of course, things pan out. Voting is currently underway in the United States of America. This, of course, is the big voting day that the campaign so far, of course, has led up to. All right, so this, of course, is the big story. The United States is en route to sealing the fate of the presidential nominees Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in the race to the White House. And it does not get bigger than this. Tens of millions of Americans are queuing up to cast their ballots, with polling underway across 30 American states. The Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance cast his vote in Ohio's Cincinnati. The senator appeared in good spirits as he arrived to vote with his family.
If you don't want an open border, vote for Donald Trump. If you want to get back to low inflation and affordable groceries, vote for Donald Trump. If you want to return the world to peace and stability, vote for Donald Trump. That's my pitch to voters. I really do believe that we can have a golden age of prosperity in the United States of America, but voters are going to ultimately make that choice.
82 million early votes have already been cast nationwide. This is slightly more than half of the total turnout in the 2020 presidential elections. Now, the battleground states, Georgia and North Carolina, have reported record early voting numbers. In Georgia alone, where the voters have swung between the Republicans and the Democrats in the last two presidential elections, over 4 million ballots have already been cast, and they were cast early. Initial trends suggest that early voting turnout has dropped across nationwide this year compared to the pandemic-hit 2020 polls. The Republicans have increased their share of pre-election votes compared to 2020, with the Trump campaign actively encouraging early and mail-in voting. In the battleground states, the early voting gender gap resembles that of the 2020 and 2022 midterm elections. About 1.8 million more women than men have cast their ballots early in the swing states this time round. However, this gap is smaller than what it was at the same point in 2020. Now, Harris has championed abortion rights and has promised to lower food and housing costs for the working families. Now, Trump, on the other hand, has vowed to secure the border and has proposed massive tax cuts to stimulate the economy. The polls show that the race is a dead heat, with Trump vowing a pretty triumphant return to the White House, while Kamala Harris has declared that the momentum is on her side. But the question, of course, is it really? What is there in the heart of the American people? How are they voting? And what, of course, is expected to happen in the course of the next 24 to 48 hours, when we'll get a clear picture as to who, of course, will be at the White House. All right, now to give us more updates and perspective in terms of what is unfolding at the moment, we are being joined by Voice of America's correspondent Jessica Stone, who's joining us from Arlington in Virginia. And also on the broadcast, we have a political science professor, John Ports, who's joining us live from Boston. Jessica, let me in fact start off with you. At this moment, give us a sense of how voting is panning out where you are, and what are you gathering from the neighboring states as well?
Well, here in Arlington, Virginia, we have had a steady stream of voters coming since 6 a.m. when there was a backlog of 60 or so people waiting at those doors behind me to get in line and begin their day by doing their civic duty. And we've had a just a 5 or 10 minute wait throughout the rest of the day. We're sort of waiting now for the lunch rush that we expect to typically get. Even though more and more Americans are working from home, we still think there'll be potentially a likely lunch rush as people take a break from their work and come and vote. But keep in mind, Virginia, like so many other states, had a surge in early voting, not enough to overcome the numbers that we saw in 2020. Certainly about a third of registered voters voted early, primarily women and young people here in the state of Virginia. More broadly, the the early vote coming a lot more rural voters and a lot more Republican voters because, as you said earlier, Donald Trump has encouraged the early vote amongst the Republicans, unlike 4 years ago.
Indeed, do continue to stay on with this, Jessica. There's a lot to talk about, how things, of course, will unfold over the course of the day. Let's also bring in Professor John Ports, who's joining us live from Boston. Professor Ports, this is a very critical election for the American people. The two candidates appear to have very different messages. Now, Kamala Harris has gone to the voters on the back of the record of what has happened in the last 4 years under Joe Biden and herself as the vice president. She's spoken about issues of abortion. She's spoken about how she wants to bring in some interesting changes to the economy, but people expect that she'll actually increase taxes. But she claims that she's got the momentum, which she certainly did when she was appointed as the Democrat nominee. But 3 months hence, on the day of the voting, do you think Kamala Harris has sustained that momentum which she had initially generated?
Well, I think she's kept some of it. I don't think it's quite at the peak it was, as you mentioned, say a month or so ago. But I think she still definitely has some momentum. I think that particularly among women voters, I mean, that's her strongest showing right now. And I think she continues with that. So we will see where that goes. It's a very close race for sure.
Now, Donald Trump, all through the course of his campaigning, he's been talking about 2-3 very critical issues. He says economy is going to be his key focus, and he's spoken a lot about immigration. Do you think Kamala Harris is something who's fallen short on these two issues? And will economy and the issue of illegal immigration to the United States become the Achilles heel for Kamala Harris? Professor Ports.
Well, I think she's tried to address those. Perhaps it could have been done in a little stronger way. I would say, particularly with the economy, that, Donald Trump has made the argument. He's asking people, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Well, 4 years ago, we were in the midst of a pandemic and an inflation that gripped the world, really, not just the U.S., but after that period of the pandemic, with, supply chain, all kinds of issues that developed. And I think that's never really been as explained, I think, as much as it potentially could be to the American public. But I think, he talks about getting back to better inflation. Well, inflation right now actually is just over 2%. So it is back to where it was before. But the thing with inflation is prices don't go down.
That's correct.
So prices are still high.
And food inflation is said to be pretty high for an average American. We'll talk more on that, Professor Ports. Do stay on with this. Jessica, if I can bring you in on this. Now, the entire voting process is pretty complicated. You've been tracking how this voting process has been unfolding in the United States of America. For people who are watching this from outside the United States, give us a sense of how this voting process is already unfolding, because almost 80 million people, according to reports, have already cast their votes through mail-in ballots, etc. And the rest, of course, are walking to the polling stations today to cast their ballots. So how's this process unfolding?
Well, I think I would make a couple of points here, Mohammed. The first is that it is not the popular vote. In other words, a majority of Americans across all of the states do not elect the U.S. president. The reason that the person who wins the White House, in fact, does so is because that person gets 270 electoral college votes or more. Each state has electoral college votes. The biggest prize today amongst the swing states is Pennsylvania. It has 19 electoral college votes, the largest number of electoral college votes. That is why you've seen these candidates focus so much on Pennsylvania and not just the urban centers, right? We saw Kamala Harris not only go to Pittsburgh and Philadelphia yesterday for her closing argument, she also went to Wilkes-Barre. She also went to Reading. She is making sure that she drives up the vote in areas that have immigrants, that have minorities, that have women, and that have any constituency that's concerned about reproductive rights, because that is a big issue that she is running on. For Donald Trump, he also went to Pennsylvania in the middle of his day yesterday to essentially run up the vote in those redder areas. He went to the center of the state. If he can run up the vote in more Republican areas and the vote is suppressed, or there's not enough people coming out in more urban areas in Pennsylvania, that could hand him those 19 electoral votes. If he gets them, it changes the path for Kamala Harris to win the White House. She has to do a harder path to get states that are not likely to go for her or that haven't always gone for her in the South. Likewise, if he doesn't get Pennsylvania, he has to win the harder votes in the Rust Belt states of Michigan and Wisconsin. And these are states where he also needed to campaign yesterday. That's why you saw him end the day in the most conservative part of Michigan, the most Republican part of Michigan, Grand Rapids, trying to run up that vote. Right now, the polls are neck and neck, but he is ahead in several of these swing states. She is ahead in other of these swing states. The largest margin between these two candidates is only 2 points when he's winning Arizona by 2 points. He is winning some by just a point. She is winning some by just a point. And remember, the undecided voters that have either not yet voted or who may not vote or who have not figured out yet who to vote until today, they are about 1% of the electorate. And that is the difference maker here.
Very interesting. Jessica, do continue to stay on with this. Professor Potts, if I can bring you in here. Now, the pollsters have been giving out numbers for the last several weeks. They've all been saying that it is a neck-and-neck contest. But what is interesting is that the issues for which Kamala Harris has been talking about and the issues that Donald Trump has been talking about are very different. In your assessment, do you think the pollsters are getting it right when they're saying that this is still a neck-and-neck race and it is open for anyone?
No, I think it is. I mean, and it's been that way for a little while. All of those, as pointed out, all the margins are within the differences are within the margin of error on most of these polls. So it is very close, and it will take a while. I mean, in terms of the process, the states have different rules about how they go about counting the ballots, and different states do it in different ways. Some take longer than others. And so the process is going to play out here for several days, most likely. We have the first North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan. Those will be the first swing states that will likely report some results, and we'll see what happens. Those are also states that have a system of counting the vote.
Now, Donald Trump has cast his ballot in Palm Beach, Florida, and the Republican presidential candidate addressed the media. And in his signature Trump style, he made some headline-worthy statements.
Look, regrets. You always have regrets. I can't think of any, to be honest, to use her expression. I can't think of any. I ran a great campaign. I think it was maybe the best of the three. We did great in the first one. We did much better in the second one, but something happened. And this was the best. I would say this was the best campaign we ran.
While listing his key priorities, Republican candidates said immigration remains #1 issue and inflation comes second on his list. Trump also said that he will admit defeat, but only if the election is fair.
If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it. And I think so far, I think it's been fair. I think there's been a lot of court cases. Both sides are lawyered up. I don't have to tell them that there'll be no violence. Of course there'll be no violence. My supporters are not violent people. I don't have to tell them that. And I certainly don't want any violence, but I certainly don't have to tell. These are great people. These are people that believe in no violence. Unlike your question, you believe in violence.
Let's tell you what's happening on the ground now. VOA correspondent Carolyn Presutti is joining us from the Trump campaign headquarters in Florida. Also on the broadcast is our correspondent Siddhant Sibul, joining us from Washington, D.C. Carolyn, if I could quickly come to you. About an hour ago, Donald Trump said after casting his vote that he will concede if the elections are fair. Now, the elections were reported to be fair last time in 2020 as well, but Donald Trump did not concede. So how should one read this comment?
Well, I think if he said it on camera, I think voters will hold him to it. If he said that he will concede if the vote is fair. Now, remember, though, he kind of set the seed early on in this campaign, or maybe about 2 weeks ago, he started saying, if we don't win, that means there was fraud involved. So he's already planted that seed in voters' heads. So for him to say that today is good news in the fact that he may accept the outcome, unlike 4 years ago. So we'll have to wait and see. He did cast his vote about 2 kilometers from where we are. We're actually in front of the Palm Beach County Convention Center. This will be Trump headquarters. Once the votes start coming in after the polls close, this is where Donald Trump, his wife Melania, all his staff, his aides, volunteers, and the media will be inside. We'll bring you all the sights and sounds with what they hope to be a victory party. If indeed Donald Trump has gotten out the votes of the young white males, that's what he says is the key to him winning. The key, though, to getting them to vote is to actually get them out of their houses today, their apartments, their condos, and to the polling place, because this demographic doesn't typically vote. So that's what Donald Trump has been trying to do in the last couple of weeks. He appeared with Joe Rogan on his #1 Spotify podcast, which 80% of his listeners are male. So that was in an attempt to reach those voters. Also, he was on Bill Belichick's podcast, Bill Belichick being a very famous football coach from here in the United States. So he is trying to reach out to those voters. Meantime, Kamala Harris trying to also reach males because she has such an enormous female population. This is the gender gap, right? I mean, it's obvious she's female, he's male. They're going to get male and female votes. Kamala trying to pull the male votes away from Trump. Trump trying to pull the female suburban white moms over to his side. So those are the challenges for these two. We're going to be watching the swing states, specifically Kamala Harris in 5 different cities in just one state, Pennsylvania, yesterday. Trump also in Pennsylvania, but North Carolina ending his bid yesterday in Michigan. So all important states there. There are 7 swing states. Most important is Pennsylvania with 19 electoral votes. So watch when these votes start coming in. The polls close, let's see, in about 5.5 hours here. So watch for those results start coming in. The first ones will be the write-in ballots, the early voters. That's 80 million Americans. I stand corrected, 83 million Americans who've already voted. So those will be the first ones counted.
Absolutely. And speaking of Pennsylvania, we're also hearing that the counting for mail-in and absentee ballots are already underway. It's a crucial state, as you mentioned this time. What's happening in Pennsylvania, if you could deep dive a little there?
So Pennsylvania, we're hoping that we'll have some results tonight, right? But let me look at Pennsylvania first. Pennsylvania changed their laws since 4 years ago. They were criticized a lot by the machine that wanted to say that this was fraudulent, the election, right? So Pennsylvania tightened down on their laws. They could not start counting ballots until 7 this morning. So they're not ahead in the vote count for those early ballots. So they had to start counting at 7. That'll probably last into the wee hours, but they say that their goal is midnight tonight. We'll see if they make it. We hope so. Meantime, Wisconsin also has that same rule where they couldn't start counting the early ballots until 7 this morning. So those are 2 swing states that may be reporting in a little bit late. Now, let me warn your viewers about a couple of things. When we first start seeing these results come in, there could be something called the red mirage. Red being the color for Republicans. So what happened 4 years ago was that when the early voting was tabulated, Trump was ahead. Then when the urban cities, those with more population, were tabulated, which takes longer, right? Then it kind of skewed towards Joe Biden, who then became the president. So just be aware of that. Early results sometimes aren't the end result. So be aware of that. We'll be watching the swing states for you, though, and can give you some context on that.
Absolutely. And Carolyn, if I could quickly go back to a very important point you made about the gender divide that we are seeing, how the male voters are kind of siding with Donald Trump and the female voters are increasing going towards Kamala Harris. I was reading a few of the voting intention by age category, and interestingly I came across this 18 to 29 category where Trump is supported only by 34%, whereas Kamala Harris goes up to 63%. Now, this is the Gen Z category that we have been talking so much about. And we heard Kamala Harris, I don't know how many times, say that she loves the Gen Z. She knows that Gen Z is important. And there has been a visible push towards this category. And it explains 63% towards Harris.
Absolutely. So I must admit, throughout history, right, the younger voter in this country has traditionally been liberal, and that is more in line with the Democratic policies, Democratic views. So that's why Trump is having difficulty reaching this group. And this group, some of them are very much an activist, very much want to come out and vote, where the others say, oh, you know, my vote doesn't count, I don't need to vote, and they're apathetic about the election. So reaching this group on both sides is very important. Get them motivated, get them off the couch today and to the polls if they haven't already voted. Now, Trump doing that with the man, right? That's why I mentioned the Rogan podcast and the Belichick podcast and reaching people on social. But also Harris did that too last week and the week before. So we'll have to see. I think in the future, honestly, in 4 years, we're going to see a different type of outreach. We're becoming a society more ruled by social media. And I think you'll see the candidates then kind of move away from the traditional reaching of voters on network, legacy TV stations, legacy radio stations, more to social. And they'll just have to adapt their campaigns that way.
Right. Also, something that I found very interesting was just 2 days before election day, a polling from the state of Iowa made headlines, not a swing state. Kamala Harris was leading in a traditionally red state. Callan, is this something we could see in other non-swing states as well this time?
Keep in mind that's one poll by a really reputable firm. But if you really dig deep into that poll, not a good enough selection of the population. And that is also what we're facing. Whenever you see a poll, always kind of trace it back, kind of see like the source, see who's conducting the poll, how many people were interviewed, who are those people who were interviewed, and also always follow that back. Sure, it did show Kamala Harris up in that poll, but again, one state, traditionally red. We'll have to see what happens tonight. Now, honestly, I talked to an expert the other day, and I heard them say, look, the polls are so close. That's not really what they show. They just show that no one really knows what's going to happen in this election. So that's one way to look at polls, right?
I've lost count how many times I've heard that in respect to the U.S. elections. Now, could you explain to our viewers as well, when is it that we could actually see the results coming out? When is it that we could paint the U.S. map in red and blue?
7 o'clock is when the East Coast states start to close their polls, right? And that's when you're going to see those early voters, that 83 million across the country, start to trickle in those results. So 7 o'clock is what, in 5.5 hours from now? That's when we'll have a better handle. And remember, in this country, we're very careful about releasing some preliminary data before everyone has a chance to vote, because that would give viewers and listeners the ability to say, well, my vote's not going to count. And we want them to vote. So you really don't want to release that information too early. But I'd say 5.5 hours from now, you'll start seeing state by state.
Right, Callan, if you could just circle back to Donald Trump quickly. He also said something that I found interesting during his recent address to the media. He said, I've done the best campaigning this time among the 3 elections, and all my campaign leaders also agree with me. How do you read that?
I read that as he has crisscrossed the country in every state imaginable. I do not know how either of these candidates do it. I consider myself high energy, but hey, and they're much older. So it's kind of crazy that each one of them, every minute of every day, has been somewhere, speaking on radio, speaking to podcasts, speaking in person, rallies, thousands of people out for rallies. Both of them have done a great job. They really have. And I don't know how the voters translate that. We're going to have to just wait and see. But yeah, I tend to agree with him. It has been his best campaign. And obviously, it's been Kamala Harris's best campaign, too. You'll remember, she ran for president in 2019. And didn't make it on the final list. So this is truly her first campaign for president.
Callan, it has been great talking to you. Thank you so much for all those updates from the Trump campaign headquarters in Florida.
My pleasure.
All right, now, for those of you who are just joining in, Americans are heading to the polls to vote for the next president, that's 47th president of the United States. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump each need at least 270 electoral votes to win. Now, the battleground states is where all the action happens, and that's exactly where the election will come down to. There are 7 of them this time: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. As I said, these are going to be the path to victory. All right, let's go quickly across to our correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, who is joining us live from Capitol Hill. Siddhant, what is the latest you have for us?
Well, currently I'm here at the Capitol Hill, and essentially the votes are being right now being made by the Americans. Billions of Americans are voting, and essentially it's a neck-on-neck battle. Nobody knows clearly that who essentially will be the president. And we'll get to know perhaps in the next 24 hours. And if you look at the previous precedents, when it comes to 2020, the results were out. At least the mainstream American media confirmed it 5 days after the elections. This time around, of course, Donald Trump has said that he will concede if it's a fair election. But that's the big question. How he defines fair is the big question, given he has a history of things not going very straight. But all in all, we know that the first rounds of indication will be due by 2:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time, and by 2 p.m. Indian Standard Time, there will be a much clarity. The last of the votings will be over by 11:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time.
Right. This election is also being referred to as a high-risk election in terms of security. Could you tell us a little about that?
Well, on security bit, first I'll let you show the visuals of the Capitol Hill, the increased security presence, as you can see, of the Capitol Hill. And that is primarily, in fact, Capitol Hill has been closed for the public. I was inside when I was doing previous lives, but I'm outside now because that place has been closed. And essentially, security is something that the local authorities don't want to take a risk on. The several establishments have put up the wooden placards and essentially we know that fences have also been put up. So security is on top of the mind of many people.
All right, Siddhant, thank you so much for all those updates from the Capitol Hill. Good to speak to you.
And joining us on the broadcast this minute is a VOA correspondent, Steve Herman, from the battleground state of Georgia. Thanks very much for being here. 16 electoral votes. The importance of Georgia cannot be overemphasized. What are you picking up from on the ground at this point? What has your interaction with the voters been like in the run-up to the election as well?
Yes, what we're finding out here on the ground in Gwinnett County, Georgia, which is one of the most diverse counties ethnically in the southeastern United States, is quite a bit of enthusiasm. We're looking at record turnout for early voting and mail-in balloting, and also here on Election Day. Every balloting polling station we've been to, there's been a steady stream of people coming in, even during sort of the off hours, not the hours where they were going to work or on their lunch break. So a lot of enthusiasm. They seem to be indicating to us that the economy is the top issue. And that appears to be the case for both Republicans and Democrats, as well as independent voters.
Right. Let's just talk about what's unfolded over the last few hours. The several non-credible bomb threats that briefly disrupted voting at 2 Georgia polling places, according to the Secretary of State, they originated from Russia. Let's just talk a little bit more about what you're picking up and what, according to you, has been the disruption like.
Yeah, Georgia and federal officials have made it clear that these non-credible threats are originating from Russia, squarely blaming the Russians for trying to disrupt the electoral process in the United States. These messages telling people it's too dangerous to go to the polls and that they should vote remotely, which is now not possible today. In Fulton County, Georgia, they are going to extend the time for voting past the 7 o'clock close for a bit to allow anybody who may have been sort of put off by these threats. So that's one of the more serious things that we've heard today here in the state of Georgia. But I can tell you we have not run into anybody here in Gwinnett County that is all concerned about any a threat to them going to the polls.
Let me also ask you this, given the mood on the ground, like you just outlined for us, and through your interaction, what really stood out for you in terms of the comparison that the voters are drawing between the two candidates?
Well, I think Gwinnett County is a microcosm of the entire United States. And one thing I think that Republicans and Democrats tend to agree on is if the other person gets elected, it's an existential threat to the United States. People are very polarized. It's very divisive, as you know, and that has really motivated people to come out. Of course, Donald Trump is trying to become the first candidate since President Grover Cleveland in the late 19th century to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, and Kamala Harris trying to make history as well, being the first black woman and person of South Asian origin to become president of the United States. So that does factor into some of it for Democrats and some independent voters. And as you well know, Trump's support has been pretty steady and consistent. He's been warning about the threats from immigrants and calling Kamala Harris a communist, a Marxist, a lot of name calling. And we'll see whether any of that really moves the needle one way or another when the results start to come in a significant manner.
Right. Steve Herman, Chief National Correspondent, VOA. Thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast with those updates. Of course, we'll be coming back to you as and when there are further updates trickling in. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Let's tell you what's happening on the ground now. VOA correspondent Carolyn Prisuti is joining us from the Trump campaign headquarters in Florida. Also on the broadcast is our correspondent Siddhant Sibul, joining us from Washington, D.C. Carolyn, if I could quickly come to you. About an hour ago, Donald Trump said after casting his vote that he will concede if the elections are fair. Now, the elections were reported to be fair last time in 2020 as well, but Donald Trump did not concede. So how should one read this comment?
Well, I think if he said it on camera, I think voters will hold him to it. If he said that he will concede if the vote is fair. Now, remember, though, he kind of set the seed early on in this campaign, or maybe about 2 weeks ago, he started saying, if we don't win, that means there was fraud involved. So he's already planted that seed in voters' heads. So for him to say that today is good news in the fact that he may accept the outcome, unlike 4 years ago. So we'll have to wait and see. He did cast his vote about 2 kilometers from where we are. We're actually in front of the Palm Beach County Convention Center. This will be Trump headquarters once the votes start coming in after the polls close. This is where Donald Trump, his wife Melania, all his staff, his aides, volunteers, and the media will be. We'll be inside. We'll bring you all the sights and sounds with what they hope to be a victory party. If indeed Donald Trump has gotten out the votes of the young white males, that's what he says is the key to him winning. The key, though, to getting them to vote is to actually get them out of their houses today, their apartments, their condos, and to the polling place, because this demographic doesn't typically vote. So that's what Donald Trump has been trying to do in the last couple of weeks. He appeared with Joe Rogan on his #1 Spotify podcast, which 80% of his listeners are male. So that was in an attempt to reach those voters. Also, he was on Bill Belichick's podcast, Bill Belichick being a very famous football coach from here in the United States. So he is trying to reach out to those voters. Meantime, Kamala Harris trying to also reach males because she has such an enormous female population. This is the gender gap, right? I mean, it's obvious she's female, he's male. They're going to get male and female votes. Kamala trying to pull the male votes away from Trump. Trump trying to pull the female suburban white moms over to his side. So those are the challenges for these two. We're going to be watching the swing states, specifically Kamala Harris in 5 different cities in just one state, Pennsylvania, yesterday. Trump also in Pennsylvania, but North Carolina ending his bid yesterday in Michigan. So all important states there. There are 7 swing states. Most important is Pennsylvania with 19 electoral votes. So watch when these votes start coming in. The polls close, let's see, in about 5.5 hours here. So watch for those results start coming in. The first ones will be the write-in ballots, the early voters. That's 80 million Americans. I stand corrected, 83 million Americans who have